We're live.
Well, thank you. I'll just give a couple more minutes. We'll start promptly at 6, just to have an opportunity for some other council folks to come in. I don't think I've had the pleasure. I'm Chuck Harmon. Chuck, I'm Jerry here. Jeff Streeter, I'm the executive director of Jeff. Jeff, it's good to meet you. Good to meet you.
Hi, I'm Brian Wilkerson.
Brian, Chuck Harmon. It's good to meet you too. Thanks for being here tonight. You know, we've got some education to be done here tonight, and you know, we're really looking to put some numbers to this. So this will be the first opportunity that council has had, and you know, to weigh the different statistics and things. You know, well, we'll see what we can do. Financial. Hey, good. All right. How about you? I should say John Curtis will not be with us tonight. Unfortunately, he's sick, and Kate Collier sent me a message that she may not be able to be here at least for the beginning. Hey there, Scott. Scott.
I talked to Jim earlier today. He said he was going to be here.
Oh, good. Okay. So, Jonathan, we're good to go, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Idaho Springs work session for September 19th, 2022. And we're going to kick things off with dispatch options.
Okay, Mayor, Councilman. So basically, we here in Idaho Springs currently contract through an IGA with the Sheriff's Department to provide 911 and dispatch services. One of the goals of council that was solidified this year on a resolution was to look at 911 communications and dispatch services and costs. So with that, I contacted the Gilpin County Sheriff's Department, which I haven't heard back from yet. And I also have met with JeffCom representation a couple of times and provided data, call for service data, so that they can gain an understanding of what the cost might be for the city of Idaho Springs if we were to consider that as a route. The other thing that was put in the memo is that it's important that council, basically the current IGA requires a 1-year notification if there's one of the entities wants to leave. So, and those need to be done during budget discussions, which is what we're doing as far as budget now. So it just seemed appropriate to invite JeffCom representation to come talk to city leadership about services and sort of what they can provide. I've also sent an invitation to the sheriff and the Sheriff's Department to have the same opportunity to come to a work session in the coming weeks to present sort of their take on that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Streeter, who's the executive director of JeffCom. And so there you go, Jeff.
Chief, thank you. Mayor, council, it's a privilege to be here and talk to you a little bit about something we're quite proud of. We're happy to answer questions for you. I certainly couldn't do this alone, albeit I'm the executive director, but I got a great staff. Brian will introduce himself in a moment. Brian Wilkerson is a consultant that helped stand up JeffCom, bringing 24 agencies together. So I thought it was very important to put apples to apples, you know, look at it in the same light. So Brian will kind of go through that. Sitting in this row off to my left back here, I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves briefly. I have my deputy director on the far left, that's Michael Brewer. In the middle is our IT director, Kevin Biegert, and on this end is our law operations manager. They're here to answer questions and help facilitate this as well. So, Mike, if you would.
Well, good evening, Michael Brewer, Colorado native, but spent 24 years in the Navy, retired surface warfare officer, retired in 2018. Hired on Jeff in my current position, deputy director, where I oversee operations and training. We have 118 emergency communication specialist positions, as well as 18 supervisors that run all the floor operations. Then I also have 3 operations managers. Jody oversees law operations, and as well as fire operations manager, call take operations manager, and then a training manager that oversees training for the organization for all the input and cross training that occurs on the floor for various channels and call take.
Kevin, if you would, please.
Hi, good evening, Kevin Biegert. I'm actually a prior dispatcher for Jeffco Sheriff. I joined Jeffcom to help with the build out, administer CAD, the systems and whatnot. I'm also prior Navy, more NSA cyber side of things. So didn't get the pleasure of going on the ships as Mike did, but a little bit different flavor on that. But thanks for having us.
Enjoy.
Good evening, Jody Malpass. I'm the Law Enforcement Dispatch Operations Manager at Jeffcom. I'm in my 29th year in the public safety dispatch industry. Spent most of my time at Lakewood Police Department. We currently dispatch for 9 law enforcement entities operating off of 11 channels.
And briefly, as I said, I'm Jeff Streeter. I was brought in to help build out and stand up Jeffcom in June of 2017. My background is 100% law enforcement, nearly 32 years law enforcement. So 3.5 years at Broomfield Police Department, 25 years at Lakewood. I retired as a commander, and I was the chief of police at the city of Lone Tree. I spent some time there thinking I was going to retire and enjoy life. And I think my wife got tired of me being around so much. And so this job came about, and they asked me to come in and help facilitate this growth. Through this team and the transitioning of those 8 PSAPs that previously existed is how we came to be. Now know that this was a proof of concept that the chiefs, the sheriff, fire chiefs, law chiefs, and the sheriff started kind of developing this mindset around 2015 of could we do regionalization? Could we truly be more efficient, more effective, saving money, providing a better service under one roof? Because it cut down on transferring calls, maneuvering systems. Everybody had disparate either CADs or radio systems, and we felt it was better to come together and do this. Technology helped us do that from the get-go. But as Jody had indicated, overall, we provide dispatch services for 24 agencies throughout Jefferson County. Brian will go into probably a few more statistics, I think, through his, but currently we do about 2,000 calls a day we process. We are a large center. Across this country, there's over 6,000 dispatch centers. We're probably in the top 150 in size. We sit at the table with very large cities and have dialogue. And we strive very much to be the top of technology on that progressive cutting edge of technology and able to do things and provide services that many of the large agencies turn to us for advice and direction because of the team that we support. So, we emergency communicators on our floor currently average about a 6-year experience. With some of our more senior people up there in their 20 years of service when we acquired them through those transitioning agencies. We're blessed in that. We too are also seeing what other agencies are seeing. A lot of turnover, but we're fortunate. We've got good staffing numbers and continuing to grow, continuing to explore our IT technology base of where we can function from that. We'll talk to you a little bit about the financial structure when Brian gets into his of how we do this. Idaho Springs would be viewed as a user agency. Member agencies make up my board. Those were the 8 previous PSAPs that existed. All the other 16 agencies are considered user agencies, and they're paying per call, per CAD entry, phone call entry. That's it. So we can talk more about that as we go. 4.5 years. of our existence. I'm pleased to tell you we received national accolades at the highest level for IT director, training managers, communication specialists, supervisor on the floor. For an agency in 4.5 years, it's relatively unheard of. But this is who we're going to be. This is how we operate. As long as I get to be in the seat that I'm fortunate enough to hold, we're going to be the best. My board expects that from me, expects that from my staff, and second place doesn't work. I'm sorry, and I don't even need to look at them. They've heard me say that. It just, I've been around long enough. It just generally doesn't work. It doesn't work for boards. It doesn't work for councils. And every one of the chiefs that I interact with, they have boards and councils they have to respond to and answer to. Our objective is to get them the right information. And all that's built through user agreements, member agreements, through statistical reports that we produce monthly, quarterly, and annually. This is your information. We want to ensure that you have it available to you. Know what those operational impacts are going to be and what we budget for future years. Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Brian. And again, I imagine we'll get into a series of questions so we get a little bit of feedback on this.
Appreciate the opportunity. I'm Brian Wilkerson. As Jeff said, well, I've been doing consulting for about 25 years now, and really for the past 10 have focused primarily on public safety and the public sector. And a lot of that has revolved around police agencies, communication, 911 dispatch, things of that nature. As Jeff said, I was actually, my consulting firm did the original feasibility study for JeffCom when the chiefs came together and said, could we do this? And I've been involved ever since. So was the program manager in the transition and have continued to work with the agency since then. We put together a presentation, not to, bore you with PowerPoint, but to really give you a foundation of what might this look like and how might it work, and to give you really a platform to ask questions from. So, and that's really what we're here, is to make sure that you get all the information that you need, that you want as we go through it. So as I'm going through this, stop me anytime, and I'm just happy to take questions as we go along. So really the background has been talked about in terms of we're really trying to present an option for you all to look at and what it might look like if we were to start doing dispatch services for Idaho Springs. Jeff gave you a lot of the background from a JeffCom perspective. I won't hit that other than to mention one other piece, which is JeffCom is one of the few 911 centers in the country that has CALIA accreditation. That's more thought of as a lot of law enforcement agencies have that. But the reason I bring that up is because to get that kind of accreditation, you really have to have your processes, your technology, your security, all of those kinds of things well done and well documented. And so it is just kind of another piece of how JeffCom really strives to do it at the highest level. So I wanted to mention that one as well, because it's just more of an illustration of the philosophy that JeffCom has in terms of how they operate. To talk a little bit more about how this would work, sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. From a scope of services perspective, there are a number of things that we would anticipate doing for Idaho Springs, starting with your basic 911 call answering, but also answering administrative calls and requests for information and things like that that are a part of any agency. Frankly, in most agencies, and JeffCom is no different, administrative calls are often equal to, sometimes greater than, the number of 911 calls that come in. And they're no less important. They get handled a little bit differently, of course, but from a standpoint of really presenting the best face for the organization, those administrative calls are very important as well. So that's another piece of it. Secondary PSEP transfers, which is a fancy word for if a call needs to go someplace else, to another agency, to Colorado State Patrol, whatever it might be, JeffCom would handle those transfers. The way that works is that you would make sure that there would be information initial information will be gathered from JeffCom, passed on to that agency to make sure that they can speed up their response and start with all the information they need. Of course, radio dispatching and what we call silent dispatching services. So putting out calls through the mobile terminals that people have in their cars and things of that nature to free up radio traffic, but all of those dispatching kinds of functions would be part of it. Data entry, of course, and tracking the different calls and those pieces. Reverse 911 notifications, I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Warrant confirmations, if they're outside of Idaho Springs, because you can confirm your own warrants, but from other agencies. Record requests and reporting, which of course, police agency reporting is always part of it. And it's always an important aspect of things when you look at it. So all of these different elements would be the services that would be provided by JeffCom. Questions about any of those before I move? Okay. What you see in front of you next is really the service levels that JeffCom commits to in terms of the agencies that it serves. And so they cover all of these different aspects from call answering and admin calls, et cetera. The main focus, of course, is to answer calls quickly, answer calls effectively. All of these standards are national standards that JeffCom follows and tries to work against. JeffCom operates with a great deal of transparency. And so as Jeff said, you can go out at any time on the website and look at how did they do last month, how did they do last year, et cetera, and see how JeffCom does against these service levels. Does JeffCom always hit these service levels every single month, every time? No, and I don't know that any agency does, but it is one of those things where every time when this data comes out, the board has insight into what's going on, and Jeff and his staff are really talking about, here's where we missed, here's how we're improving, this is what we found as root causes, those kinds of things. So I don't want to make the claim that, JeffCom is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is an organization that prides itself on the level of service and continuously is improving those things. So all of these different areas are sort of the critical ones to make sure that, and as I mentioned, they're all national standards to make sure that you're providing the level of 911 service that you need. I know that there's a lot of focus in this on cost, and that's an important aspect, of course. But if you look back at when we were talking about JeffCom initially, it wouldn't have been worth doing if the service wasn't better. If the service wasn't better than the individual agencies were able to offer on their own. And so that's also a really important consideration for all of you is you have to feel comfortable that you're going to get better service in addition to a reduced cost, because if not, it's not worth it in my opinion. So those are just something to keep in mind as you consider this, because the citizens, obviously that's the key component.
Well, I just want to inject, I just from personal experience living in the community for 27 years, without a doubt, we have one of the best sheriffs in the state of Colorado here in our county. We're just very fortunate, 40-year veteran. He may be one of the best in the United States. So we would only be looking at this, not because of any kind of dissatisfaction.
Sure.
But it's got to be at least as good or better, because I don't think council would be interested in trading off money for safety. There's not a reason it should ever happen. And so anyways, I did read into the awards before the meeting today. I'm glad to see that, but I'd like to hear more about how you feel this is JeffCom is superior to, say, for example, Clerk Creek County, because I think it's important that, and I'm talking about in dispatch, but
yeah, we don't want to get into that.
No, I just think it'd be important for council to hear, if there are some improvements that we'd like to hear. I'll take a shot at it, and the sheriff's sitting right behind me. So, and we have asked for the sheriff's department to come in. Absolutely, and you should hear from all sides. I think first and foremost, what JeffCom provides is a force multiplier. Right now, dispatch centers across the country are all suffering, as are sheriff's departments, law enforcement agencies, and even the first responder group, finding good qualifiable applicants. People aren't sticking around in these jobs to be a profession. They'll stay for a little bit. They go, what's the turnover rate? How do you keep it? Okay. What we offer is a force multiplier. We're a large agency. Smaller agencies, and what we saw during this transition is most of the smaller PSATs were struggling in staffing, the ability to have appropriate staff on at the appropriate time, and how do you ever anticipate when that big call is going to drop in the sheet? So they were all kind of balancing from that. And not having had a previous conversation with the sheriff, I certainly can't answer what his staffing and what that looks like. In a large center, what happens, what we're seeing more and more these days is in the introduction of cell phones. It's safe to say the majority of people will operate off cell phones and not landlines anymore. So now what's happening in the change of this industry is you can have one accident out here on I-70 where you might have got somebody to a call box and they were called in and told you about it. Now that one accident is going to generate 25, 50 phone calls, depending, because everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody that drives by it, until police and emergency responders are on scene, they're all going to call to ensure that law enforcement is en route. We've got the resources and capabilities to answer that. It is very trying and taxing on much smaller centers to do that. Okay, much smaller. Now, can't answer, don't know what the sheriff's statistics are, what his numbers are, or what he's seeing, and I certainly will not speak to that. Okay, we have a force multiplier. We're a large agency. At any given time, we're dealing with 30, 35 people, depending on shift changes, maybe more on that floor. We all have the capability of answering calls. Case in point, everybody up here is well familiar with that reckless semi that came through I-70, dropped down off of Genesee and plowed into all those cars here a few years back. We processed 85, 89 911 calls in 10 minutes. Very few centers could ever handle that. And then what they do is they roll those calls out to other centers. They have a rollover. If our center gets blown up, what's their backup? And they roll those calls out. We no longer have to do that. Believe it or not, in Jefferson County, they had to do that. They had to do it under some other critical incidents. And one that comes to mind that, again, all of us are well aware of is the Columbine incident. Jefferson County Sheriff gets inundated with all the 911 calls. Lakewood was their backup. Our backup's now Denver Police Department because they are big enough to support us in that realm if we ever blow up our systems. We haven't done it. Knock on wood, I got to hit something. But we're prepared and we thought through these processes to be able to do that. And there's your force multiplier. When we talk differences, first and foremost, okay? You owe to your constituents, the people who live in the city, as do every one of the chiefs and fire chiefs we report to, down the line. Okay. Having been a chief, I don't like being in the eye of city councils and boards either. You've got to do it right the first time. This group back here, the ability to manage the training, hiring, staffing up, technology, we're doing a lot of unique things. We find other means because I run over a $21 million budget to make this all happen. We're exploring new technology. I'll give you an example. Artificial intelligence. We're into that arena, it's here. Where we can move some calls off and free up the call takers to even provide a better service. That's pretty unique. And not many centers around the country are starting to explore that, but we're well in the mix of it. We're doing testing with the industry vendor. So we're willing to broach into that where a lot of other agencies may or may not have that funding. We've also been able to produce 6 years in a row of a budget with a zero net increase with my board or my members on a $21 million net increase. A lot of this has to do with our relationship with our 911 authority board. The money that all of us pay, the tariffs that we all pay within our cellular phone services. There's a 911 authority up here in Clear Creek. I don't know what the current tariff is. I'm sure the sheriff does. In Jefferson County, I received approximately $9 million. Help us fund emergency communication. Totally different entity. Totally different entity. That's how we're able to produce 6 years in a row with zero net increase to anybody. As a chief, I used to always factor just a rule of thumb, 3 to 5%. I know my budget's got to go up 3 to 5%. And salaries or something else. Fully staffed at 155 employees, zero net's a big deal. It's a big deal to cities to function. It's a big deal for us. Be able to do it. That's a partnership, and we paved the way through some of those partnerships to make these things happen. We're proud of that. Getting calls from around the country. How do we do it? How, and I appreciate that. That's kind of who we need to be. Is that cutting edge? And that's all I grew up in. In 25 years of Lakewood, we always push the envelope. That's how I'm wired, and my staff is wired that way very much. In the same regard, I agree with you, Mayor. It's got to be better. It's got to be better. Okay, it's got to save you money too. Your citizens deserve that. Your officers deserve that. They need to be protected. So absolutely. And it's collaboration, regardless how this shakes out. Now, please know when Nate reached out to me, Chief called me up and he had talked to some folks and just reached out. This isn't Jeffcom going out knocking on doors trying to take over the world. That is not us. Technology allows us to do this. We have the bandwidth to do this. We have the confidence to know we can provide a better service at cheap. It's there. I hope that answers your question.
I apologize if I'm jumping ahead.
No, you're quite all right. I appreciate that.
And this, if, and of course it was an if, but if the city chose to go with Jeffcom, I noticed hearing your information packet, you're thinking like a 6-month transition. Is that correct?
I would anticipate
4 to 6, yeah.
Yeah,
4 to
as
6.
a staff, we talked about that. We felt that was a reasonable approach.
And have you done this in other cities?
Yeah, so Jeffcom started out with a smaller number of agencies. Of course, we had to do it for every agency that transitioned in initially. And then since then, we've brought on other agencies. So the most recent one would have been Foothills Fire up here. And so so transitioning that one into, because they didn't come on board initially. And so we've been through this process a number of times. And the reason why we try to do a 4 to 6 month transition is because there are multiple things that need to get covered. One is just understanding your operational procedures, how things work, your geography, all those different kinds of components. There's technology, of course, routing 911 calls, radios, all of those kinds of things, training that goes along with that. But also it's helping make sure that Jody is working with the chief and those kinds of things to make sure what is the service that you need and that you want and those kinds of things, and that everything is smooth in that time frame. Could you do it faster? Sure. But I think that those are the timeframes that we laid out, because part of it too is that you want the right level of technology integration that's there too. And as we all know, that takes a little bit of time also.
And speaking of the technology integration, I think the guesstimate was $50,000.
So that would be for the CAD to CAD component. So to make a CAD to CAD connection to Clear Creek County. And so I mentioned earlier transferring calls and moving between those centers. The amount of efficiency that you gain by having that direct interface between the two CAD systems is tremendous. There's really no substitute for it. The old manual way of like, I take a call, I write it all down, I give it to someone, you can imagine the inefficiency that does versus I get the information, I enter, and it's immediately on their screens as well. So that's the most expensive piece of the technology component. There's a couple others that were in there, as you saw, but
I saw like $200-300 a radio.
Yeah, those are kinds of things that you have there. But the CAD to CAD piece is really the foundational element of it, and that takes a little bit of time as well to do. But that one we think is really important.
You had an interface with RMS too as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Sure.
Do we currently have the same CAD system though as you guys at Jeffcom, or?
No, it's a different system.
It is.
Yeah. So
Because we're compatible with Sheriff, am I correct, sir? Obviously, you guys,
Same.
Gilpin, Blackhawk, yes,
correct.
but not with Jeffcom.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So
So we run on E4s, yeah.
Correct.
Thank you.
And so that's why that CAD to CAD integration becomes an issue. And this is really the trend. Right now, how many CAD to CAD integrations do you all have?
We have the one with South Metro currently, with 3 additional agencies expected in the next 12 months.
It's becoming a bigger thing because, more and more, there's just a lot of collaboration among, in the Front Range area, just a lot of collaboration among these different agencies, and that CAD to CAD is an additional way to do it. So the hub that you're attaching to is actually a Colorado hub, not specific to Jeffcom.
And why wouldn't it be, why is Jeffcom's different than, just say us for up here and the SO and, Gilpin in them? Well,
Yeah, so over the years, everybody's kind of bought different systems. So for example, so the one that Jeffcom uses, a very common one, Central Square.
what is it? I'm sorry.
Central Square, yes, and it used to be called something else, but a lot of these companies have acquired each other. So over the years, everybody made these decisions kind of individually. So Boulder County has something different, and a lot of people around the Front Range have something different. So it's just, how just different folks have made different decisions over time.
So, sir, the Colorado hub is basically vendor agnostic.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have Central Square to be able to play in the same hub with everybody else.
Sure. Yeah,
So that-
driving or Chevrolet.
Yeah, exactly. You can do anything. Other questions at this point? So a couple of things I'll just talk about. I mean, I don't need to get into this too much because you know it already, but this is the kind of parameters that we got from the chief around your current operations and how you do things today. So it's more your number of officers and things of all that nature. So I won't spend too much time on that unless folks have questions there, but I do want to talk about the technology and dive into it a little bit further. So one of the primary things, of course, is radios and making sure that radio communication is seamless. A number of different options in terms of how Jeffcom could accommodate Idaho Springs from a radio perspective. And so we're looking at a number of different ones. We've given the chief a radio to be able to monitor some of the channels that we're considering that Idaho Springs could go on to see, if the traffic deals are okay, et cetera. But in looking at the capacity that we have on these radio channels, there's a couple of different options for how we could do this and accommodate Idaho Springs in there. And so that's something that we'll need to get done. Depending on which of those channels we go to, there may be a dedicated data channel included, which just helps keep some more routine traffic off of the radio. A lot of things like, calling in for, people's records and things like that goes to that. From a CAD, we talked about that, but also the officers would have access to Jeffcom's CAD through their mobile terminals in their cars and be able to look at all that information. Records management, there's an interface between eForce and the record management system that would be out there. Reverse 911 would be something we would have to talk about. So right now, the sheriff's office obviously handles that for you, and how you would want reverse 911 and those kinds of notifications to be handled in the future. Jeffcom currently handles that for the agencies that it serves. The platform that you're on is the one that Jeffcom was on previously. And so Jeffcom's moved to a different platform. So we need to talk about sort of what that looks like and how that one would work. And I think there's options there. There are a lot of different technology components that Jeffcom has that would be available to Idaho Springs as you look at that. I haven't dove into a ton of them because the list is a bit overwhelming, but I'll start on one end with the incident command vehicle that Jeffcom just recently stood up, which is available to agencies that are out there. So if you have some kind of tactical incident or those kinds of things, they can actually just deploy a tactical dispatch team on site through this vehicle, which is very impressive, great situational awareness, wildfire management, any of those kinds of things. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is very sophisticated mapping and geolocation technology to help with officer safety and those kinds of things. So there's a number of different pieces that are out there that could be used for Idaho Springs as well. I didn't want to just get into a pure technology discussion, but just to make you aware that there are some other options that would be things that you could use as well. The way that Jeffcom works, and we'll get into cost in a second, all of that stuff is included in the base per call fee that Idaho Springs would pay. There's not an extra charge for anything else really. So it's only if, for example, you need some kind of additional custom technology integration or something like that, that would be purely unique to you, that would incur some kind of cost, that you would pay anything besides what we're talking about. So other questions about the technology side?
There's so if somebody were to call 911 in the Idaho Springs area, so it goes to Jeffcom, and then it's transferred for what's the acronym for it?
CAD to CAD. So only if it was outside of Idaho Springs. So if someone in Idaho Springs were to call, 911 goes to there. If they need police services, then Jeffcom is just going to dispatch that out, and
through Idaho Springs or whatever.
That's correct. That's right. And so, but if it was some other services, right, fire or other kind of emergency services or those kinds of things, that's when it would get transferred to the appropriate PSAP. In this case, most likely Clear Creek County, depending on what it was, for them to dispatch that.
Right. So, but if they PSAP that from, let's say there was an issue in Silver Thorn, but it was actually Silver Boom. Well,
Sure.
vice versa, right?
Yep, absolutely. That's all time. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So is it just time added? I mean, there's where like an experienced dispatcher, like can pick that up.
Correct.
Or we're adding 10, 15 minutes to a call. Yes.
No. Well. So the if you look at the data, right? Let's just say there was a purely manual transfer, right? The average would be 1.5 to 3 minutes, right? That it would add to that call. Getting into the 3 minutes is frankly a lot around COVID protocols and some of the things that we had to do during COVID to get COVID related information and those kinds of things. Some of those transfer times creeped up,
Sure.
As you look at those things.
So so it's all based off of like a cell phone signal.
That's correct.
So if it is in the city limits of Idaho Springs, or you think it may be, right? Because it's a triangle.
Correct. That's right. Yeah. So it'll go there.
It would just go there. But if it's not, or it shows it is, like, does it PSAT to the sheriff's office?
So depending on which
Right.
tower it bounces off of,
Right.
So let's say it thinks you're outside the city and in the county, okay, it would go to Clear Creek.
So my ultimate question is that if we pay for the service with Jeffcom, but we have to use that feature, do we pay the sheriff's office as well?
Well, obviously I can't speak to the sheriff's office, but you really shouldn't have that because it would just be a transfer, right? And
Well, we
again,
shouldn't have a lot of things, but.
Certainly,
So,
yeah, obviously I can't speak to the sheriff's office, but so if
well,
they,
it just seems like there could be a double dip feature of what we currently already have versus, what we tentatively could be getting into. Where there might be right, we're still getting billed for base cell time through,
well, in our case, you would only get billed if it was processed by Jeffco. So let's just say, for example, that there is and if I get off track, let me know. But let's say that it's something that's just a transfer up to Clear Creek, right? We're not gonna bill.
No.
So so that's not, it's
Okay.
only if something that we actually dispatch, right? So in your
Okay.
case, if it's something that needs to go someplace else, you're not getting charged.
that was, okay.
Well, we build that call in the CAD. You take a 911 in the city limits, it's built in the CAD, but all of a sudden you need Clear Creek Fire to respond.
Or
An
a sheriff's,
ambulance or a sheriff's deputy to support or back up.
right,
We transfer that, no other additional costs. The 27 is charged Idaho Springs, we just move that call. We do it with Denver, we do it with South Metro Fire, we do it with Westminster, a multitude of agencies down on the Front Range. That's common practice. We recognize that, okay, here's the call, you guys start rolling, they're gonna need emergency services on the fire side. We transfer that to Clear Creek calls them and gets them rolling.
sure,
It happens,
It won't go to our piece.
it won't, the 911 will come to us, those that are in the city limits.
right, but it's getting dispatched
Yes.
from them. But if it's outside of the city limits, although it shows in the city limits, but it's actually not,
Still be a transfer, yeah.
It'd be a transfer. We recognize that if it's on I-70, we know that's CSP. We'll notify CSP, we'll notify Clear Creek County.
that was my question.
That doesn't impact the cost of Clear Creek.
Okay,
Or Idaho.
or Idaho Springs.
And we're not charging anybody else. We're not
Gotcha.
charging us.
Okay,
I think another aspect of Jimmy's question is, we have an outstanding working relationship with the county.
Right.
And the county sheriff will often back us up or occasionally vice versa. So it seems like maybe there's a double charge on that more rare case of backing each other up. I mean, I'm just guessing.
There would not actually,
Not from
because,
us.
yeah, because what would happen is like we said, can't speak for other agencies, but in terms of us transferring to and notifying another agency that you need assistance, those kinds of things, you don't charge for that. So
I
yeah,
got you.
so.
Okay, yeah, okay, not a charge.
I guess one important amendment
Go ahead.
is when we pull the stats, and the stats all come out of my department, we have an analyst who pulls all this the same way for all of our agencies. As Jeff and Brian have said, the call has to be received by Jeffcom, processed and dispatched and in your jurisdiction. So again, mutual aid calls where you are going out, even if we dispatch you to that, that's not a part of the bill.
No.
One other thing I did want to add, technology related, talking about the routing, we're kind of on the cusp of something pretty important here. One thing that Jeffcom is really pushing and trying to be a leader on is geo-based routing. So right now you referenced the triangulation of the cell towers, the way that they routed previously. AT&T has already switched on geo-based routing where it's not based off of that triangulation anymore. It is, where is the phone, the Uber, the pizza analogy, where is the actual phone? So we have that capability. We're pushing T-Mobile. We've submitted paperwork by every indication. We're going to be one of the first ones in the state that T-Mobile is going to enable that for us. And this would be for any location that we service.
and even if they're sharing towers between different.
That's right.
Okay.
So that means theoretically, again, T-Mobile and AT&T here, hopefully. in
Different
short order,
carriers, yeah, that,
even if the triangulation would have pinged and sent to a different PSAP previously, it's going to come direct to us. So like I said, we're pushing Verizon very hard to enable that as well.
cool.
Other technology questions, I know that's an important aspect.
One of the things that I think the general public might need some assurance on is the transferring of calls. Because can you speak to that a little more, how that is done and how that doesn't necessarily mean increasing dispatch time, because I think in earlier years, there was that concern that, okay, now it's all under one dispatch in Clear Creek County. And they have the situational awareness of what's going on. And now if Idaho Springs was the only one to go, can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like to someone who calls 911 and that the call's not going to get dropped? There's not going to be a delay in dispatch and transfer or for other resources that are needed.
Sure.
And I know you've addressed that a little bit, but just I think there's that
Yeah, it's an important
lingering concern out there. Say, okay, well, you go to this distance, dispatch center that's not local. How is that gonna work?
Sure.
So the citizen will call 911.
Yeah.
And if they're in the city of Idaho Springs, that call will automatically go to JeffCom. JeffCom will answer that call.
Even with a cell phone?
Even with a cell phone.
Yep, okay.
They will do a double verification to make sure that we have the correct address. And if it's for a law response, it's automatically going to get dispatched by JeffCom. If it's a fire or medical, then that call will then be transferred up to Clear Creek County, one button transfer to Clear Creek County. We stay on the phone, we introduce the call until we know there's a connection with Clear Creek County. And that's where the CAD to CAD would come into place as well. We would be entering that and then we could send our call notes directly to them as well.
So-
The introduction, sorry.
So Clear Creek County in that situation would be able to see what you're seeing if you have that CAD
Through CAD to
interface.
CAD,
Is
yes.
that right?
Yes.
So it's like you're real time sharing information.
That's exactly
Correct. In the case of the CAD to CAD, what could happen there is that they theoretically get that call in on their screen, like what Brian was saying, before the call even gets transferred to them. Then the call gets transferred to where the handoff can be made as far as the interrogation and gathering the information from the call. One thing I did want to point out that is very relevant to this is when Jody says that introduction is made from PSAP to PSAP, what that sounds like is typically JeffCom with the transfer MVA at whatever location. It's not that all the information that we gathered is suddenly lost and pushed aside. As a matter of fact, then the receiving telecommunicator can many times go ahead and put in that location and start to get the response started because that's already happened once. So instead of having to repeat efforts. And that's where collaboration is a big part of it too, because it's trust in everything is gained, even minus a CAD to CAD. CAD to CAD would be the ultimate premier. The collaboration bit is where, again, the service levels can continue to improve even with having separate centers.
Even there's like what Andy said, that you still have, even transferring like through PSAP, because we're CAD to CAD, whatever, but is there ever an issue with, other parts of just geographically that person may not even, they're just simply reading whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. Does that bring a nervous factor to
So in, I think we've,
because I couldn't dispatch my trucks to another county.
Sure.
I don't know.
well, and so it's interesting, right? I think we've hit this 24 times, right? Every agency that comes in kind of has the same concern, because, and it's a justifiable one because, there are always nuances and subtleties in geography. You mentioned silver thorn and silver plume, right? Which sounds funny, but it's true, right? And most geographies have nuances like that are important nuances, right? So part of that is that upfront transition, really trying to understand geography and some of those kinds of things. But also keep in mind that, the ones that JeffCom is going to be directly dispatching are going to be Idaho Springs PD specifically. There's going to be a lot of time up front getting to know those geographies, those operations, et cetera. From a standpoint of EMS, fire, and a lot of those other kinds of things, those are going to go straight up to Clear Creek, who obviously knows the geography as well,
Sure.
right? So I think that it's a huge concern every time we do one of these, and I think we've been able to successfully address it every time through that process.
Right. I think once it gets to, Mr. Sheriff's office up there, they're pretty confident.
Sure.
Then, but it seems the steps.
It's the in-between.
Right. That
And I
there's
really,
always probably a concern. So,
Yeah, I
and
really
I know that, I'm sorry to interrupt.
okay.
I know that he has the dispatchers ride with deputies to,
Yep,
right, to,
totally, yeah,
so
Yeah.
kind of learn where they're at, and what they're calling out calls for.
yeah.
As much as the dispatchers have to be educated on the geography and learn it, and we send ours out to do right along with all of our agencies.
Right.
COVID put a kick in that, as you have
Right. What else is
We're
there
back
to do?
doing that because we have a lot of new dispatchers. It's important for them to understand your topography, geography, everything about it. Those landmark places, when you say Bojo's, they know, I know where that is, they
Right.
got it, okay? That just takes some time and experience, and we, as Brian said, we've done that 24 times. But equally, the public's gotta be educated. There's gotta be a reverse side to this, where they understand when they call, maybe it doesn't say Clear Creek. For Evergreen, it no longer said Evergreen Fire, it's Jeffcom 911. For the sheriffs, it was Jeffcom 911. For Lakewood, it was no longer Lakewood.
Right.
We put a pretty big marketing push on it. The agencies put a pretty big marketing through social media and stuff. We've got to educate them because it is going to be different for them. They're going to pause for a moment and say, "Did I call the right number? I'm
Right,
not talking to you guys. I'm at Clear Creek."
and you brought up a great point,
Like, it takes time, but I will tell you, I felt in all honesty, I thought it was gonna take longer. I mean, I really did. Per agencies, we were cutting agencies in and taking them in. We did this over a month's time. The 24 agents. I thought, oh my gosh, this is gonna take, we're knocking our doors open through the month of March. And I really thought we were gonna be 2 years into this and people were still gonna be gravely confused. Within a few months, the word had traveled, people got used to it. And we educated the public, because there's been such a good push there.
Frankly, the research also shows that when people call, the main thing they're listening for is 911, and they often don't even hear the rest of what gets said, in terms of that. So, yeah, admin calls, it's a little bit different.
gotcha. Yeah, like Evergreen, the Home Depot, there's golden,
Right,
Sure.
but everyone knows that's Evergreen.
right, right, exactly.
So,
And our folks know that, and we have mapping capabilities that are state of the art. So when that call drops in, that map pops up right in front of them. They're going, well, I see where you're at. Now we have to double verify it to make sure that there's not a glitch. And that's just an industry standard. Sure. That have to occur with cell phone usage, yes.
thanks
And
for the
on
answer.
that note, we were actually the first in the state of Colorado to implement, it's called Rapid SOS. That's what actually does take that pinpoint location from your phone and it automatically populates into the CAD. So even with zero geography or knowledge of what we were just talking about, it will still pinpoint the caller there. Another one, 42 weeks ago, we were the first in the state to implement the Z-axis, which means we're receiving elevation in addition to X and Y. So if you go up the hill here, you go up towards the mine and whatnot, we will get an actual reading off the phone that indicates they were higher in elevation than down where we are here.
Thanks for the clarification.
Other technology questions, I know it's an important aspect, so I don't want to short shift it. So dollars, obviously another important aspect. What we did was we basically took the call volumes that were provided by the chief and really showed what that would translate to if it were under Jeffcom. So just a reminder that, it's really calls for service that are dispatched by Jeffcom. So if an officer initiates a call and says, I'm going to go out and do this, that's not charged. Those are the kinds of things I just want to kind of clarify what is and what isn't. But we basically go on a rolling 3-year average as we look at it. And then we look at the historical to sort of project the next quarter of charges or next year of charges and those kinds of things. And then as volumes change, obviously that gets adjusted. But we want to be able to give people the ability to budget and figure out kind of what they're going to get charged, et cetera. So the chart that you see on the right-hand side is really the core dispatch services and what those will cost based on the call volumes that we have. The other charges from an ongoing perspective is basically mobile CAD licenses, which are basically $1,200 per license. That's a vendor charge. It's not something that we, really make money off of. Radio support, and we would need to talk about how that gets done. And then the eForce, that interface to your record management system is basically $7,000 a year. A couple of one-time charges we mentioned, CAD to CAD integration, and then the reprogramming that may be necessary from a radio perspective would be based on the vendor you choose, et cetera, $100 to $200 per radio. I think I looked and you have 24, 25 radios about, if you count the vehicles and the handheld radios that people use. So to give you a little bit of a sense of what that would look like as well. Questions about this piece? I know this is an important one.
Well, I thought it was interesting. So if an officer is going to do, I don't know, something proactive, maybe, want to look at the background of somebody or something.
Sure.
That's not a charge.
That's correct.
Right there.
Or if they see something suspicious and they would need to go check that out or what have you, or, those kinds of things, traffic stops, all of those are not charged. So.
Okay.
The transfer fee for supposed to be like one time, all right?
So we'll have to
Not
confirm
annually.
that. We'll have to confirm that. We got a little bit different of answers of whether E-Force charges annually for that or just one time. So so that's something we're just gonna have to confirm. I went on the conservative side and said annual, but it may be just a one time.
So I'm going out on a limb here, and probably more a statement than a question, but I doubt very seriously if our dispatch has a lot of fat. I think probably the savings here would just be economies of scale,
That's correct.
and you implemented, and I guess stayed up on technology. So
That's correct. Yeah. It is scale, and dispatch increasingly has become a scale game. And I think that's why you're seeing so much regionalization around the country is the cost to really keep up with, 911 technology and those kinds of things just keeps going up and up and up. And so it just becomes more and more challenging. And so I think that's why more and more scale has been required to really keep costs down and keep services up.
Do you anticipate there would be costs to the sheriff's office if we went to Jeffcom to make this all happen?
No. Okay. I don't have a contract with them. There'd be no cost from Jeffcom to receive transfers even done into us.
Well, let me ask that a different way. Do you anticipate in order for them to continue interfacing with our city and Jeffcom, do you think would they incur costs to make that happen? Does that make sense? I realize it wouldn't from you necessarily, but.
Yeah, if they elected to do the CAD to CAD, they would have a cost. It
Okay.
would be that one-time cost to have that capability of the transferring, to help their staff, help our staff, help the public.
Okay,
There'd be that cost. But that's not a cost coming to me, that's to the vendor.
okay,
Direct, if they so elected to do that, that's not a hell over their head, you have to do it. It would help in a lot of cases, Clear Fire up along that Evergreen Fire Line area, where we have some that's in Evergreen District, but it's Clear Creek County. There's a lot of things that would make a clear-cut distinction as to a benefit. But that would be up to what the sheriff was capable of doing if he felt comfortable, but that would be it.
but the CAD to CAD is a key component of this whole operation, right?
It's not a deal breaker, but it certainly has its level of efficiencies. I would hope it would stay up there as a priority. I hope everybody would see the gains
Okay,
to be had.
To the point you raised earlier, the primary thing that it helps with is those transfers, right? And making sure that those are as efficient and as quick as possible. As Kevin said, often when you're talking about a CAD to CAD transfer, the other dispatch center is already on it before the true transfer of a call happens, right?
if you don't have that, then you're back to older technology, if you will, where
That phone call.
Jeffcom is calling and saying, hey, we're transferring this call. So I think that's critical, in my opinion, if this were to happen, that we have to have that CAD to CAD. And it sounds like there'd be a cost to the city, which you've identified, but in order for the Clear Creek County would also need to.
Well, it really should be this cost.
Okay.
Who bears it? It's a vendor cost at the end of the day. And so it's that piece. We're estimating for the full integration cost,
Okay.
estimate based on conversations with the vendor. So that's how you would split those costs, how you would look at some of those kinds of things, obviously, something to be worked out for you all know.
And I missed I'm sorry, it was a few minutes late because I'm a slacker, but I missed the difference in the cost annually between Jeffcom and the sheriff's office. Or did we,
Chief, you want to speak to that?
I'm sorry.
Chief, you want to?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chief.
So we're projected,
$299 and change for fiscal year 2024.
right, we're projected to be close to $300,000 in cost for the sheriff's department. So
Currently, if we stay where we're at.
we're currently at about we're projecting this year to be about 160 to 170,000.
I saw that,
But-
but
But we're still, so the sheriff initially, when this all came together, there was sort of a projected total cost, and then what they did was they broke it down into 15% increments over a number of years.
correct,
So we're gonna be at our max increment in 2024.
like 303 or something else.
Correct, it's in that, we'll be in that area. So,
And you guys are,
Oh, so if you look in your packet, there's a grid that has, it's
Yeah,
basically
I-
81.5.
I told you I was
That's
fine,
projected.
right?
No worries at all, no worries at all. So,
That's
yeah,
projected off
so-
of call volume though, right?
that's correct. So flip that
So
page.
it's
right there.
according to
That's
call
right.
volume.
And we do it on a 3-year average. So even if you had an anomaly year where calls just went through the roof, no, by the time we average those 3 years, that year will drop off. We've seen it with other agencies. So they gave us the same numbers that we asked Chief to provide, and we established that first benchmark year. And then next year, we dropped off one of their years they provided, and the year we had in our system. And we averaged those 3 years, and we just started dropping off. We're no longer using the data, obviously, we've been into this for 4.5 years, we're no longer using the data they provided, it's right out of our system. This number could be a little low, could be a little high, depending on the accuracy of what's been provided to us, I don't know. But we've seen a couple agencies, where all of a sudden they'll have a year that just spiked for whatever reason. And those years are gonna happen, but just know they'll drop off too.
And I'm sorry, chief, on our current charge to the county, is that based off of call volume or is it?
so it's based off of call volume, but we're also, so you have to look at the way we're currently charged is they take in, from my understanding, is they take their entire dispatch budget and then it's based on usage. And so Idaho Springs falls typically anywhere from 18% during a low period, the lower quarter, up to like around 30%. And so the other thing that you have to consider is that part of that, it's not just calls into dispatch, it's traffic stops, it's building checks, security checks, patrols, running license plates. So we're charged for all of those other things as a call.
So it's on this graph, it's 29.75%, so.
Right. And so again, that
Charged.
with the sheriff's department and with the county, it varies. So depending on activities, and there's some, there's some things that I think are happening with agencies, and I don't want to overspeak, but I think that because there's charges for, like doing a foot patrol, then officers just don't call out for foot patrol. I'm not saying it's happening here in Idaho Springs, but I'm under the impression those sorts of things are happening. And that's really not safe, and it can kind of almost skew things. And the other thing as a police leader, I want to see our officers be proactive. I want to see, occasionally doing some traffic enforcement is in groups together. Because that may actually impact people's behavior when they think, oh, I might actually get pulled over today on I-70. So there's things that I'd like to do as a police leader, and I certainly have concerns about that, about the extra dollars and those raising those percentages. But the other conundrum that the county has is if they just do it based on the calls that Jeff Com was talking about, well, it's probably going to be very similar to that number as well, because you have the county who probably has about 40% of the call volume, and Idaho Springs has probably that 25 to 30% call volume. We're the second busiest user compared to Georgetown and Empire. So even if you eliminate that and you base it just on those other percentages, I think you're still going to see similar costs based on the current IG, current model.
Yeah, I see what you mean, Chief. They're around 29%. And 2024 projection is 303 and change, 303,000 and change. I really appreciate that, and I see what you mean about the percentages.
Right, and certainly, like I said, Mayor and Council, I think it's important that the sheriff's here, that he has an opportunity to come back. Yeah, and this is just basically information gathering, so that really the city leadership can decide whether there's pros and cons, and whether they want to potentially send a letter to the sheriff's department and that board that there's an intention to leave that, because that's obviously quite a process. So, but we do have, this does need to be decided before the end of this year.
Right.
And certainly those conversations we just want to make sure that we're providing a very good service, that the officers are being taken care of, and the citizens who call 911 are getting a timely response. So it's all these things are considered, and so it's a lot for council to ponder.
And again, your charge is 81,000, but other than inflationary fees, your increases would be based on inflationary fees, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And as we mentioned, they haven't changed for now going on to 6 years as we go into the new budget cycle. So I can't say that'll go for it. But obviously they've done a good job of managing the cost.
Well, inflationary fees, let me restate that, inflationary fees, and if there's any costs to running your business would be part of.
They could, we haven't seen it, it wouldn't be a drastic, okay, it's 27 now, if we felt we need to increase it, maybe it goes to 28. I don't know what that looks like in the scheme of things. That is, again, the users on these elevator, or these fees, this based on this structure, that isn't where we're getting our money and our key funding. Please know that. Okay, my member agencies are footing the bill to about $11 million. Keep in mind, I'm getting about $9 million from the 911 authority. What I see in the change of fees among the users is based on those call loads. So looking at going into next year's budget, I have some agencies based on their calls for service. The highest one going up is 13% increase. They dropped off a year, the calls for service in that agency have just collectively gone up. This year, they're seeing a 13% increase, where last year they may have paid $3,000, they're paying $3,400. That's 13% in that module. Does that make sense? But it's just based on those calls for service. This isn't on the calls for service at 27 isn't the make or break for JFCOM. I think that's why it's safe to say we can keep those costs down. We have some other funding sources and means. Okay. Yeah, is the board gonna run out of runway at some point in time? Costs are gonna have to go up. Yeah, that's just the price of doing business, but because of our partnership with our 911, what they draw in. And I recognize it is certainly considerably different than what Clear Creek County 911 is drawing, because it's only on your residents' cell phones that are registered here within the county. But Jefferson County's tracking 700 some odd thousand cell phones. So it looks different. It's scalable.
And your proposal does not include the Clear Creek County 911 authority, no contribution. It's not,
nothing at all.
it's not county any contribution from.
I wouldn't ask for any contribution. This is a contractual agreement should you elect with just us and you, but the county maintains and keeps that. Yeah.
Other questions on costs? Just, I know we're running a bit, so just a couple of brief pieces. Transition timing was mentioned earlier, but essentially 4 to 6 months, primarily technology implementation, geography knowledge, response plans, processes, all the things you need to do to make sure that the service is seamless day one. So we try to target a 4 to 6 month window for that to make sure that everything's smooth and everything works well. Can be done shorter if necessary, but again, that's what we would like to do. That CAD to CAD interface and getting that up in that time would also be an important aspect of that, obviously. So those are the things that really drive that timeline. During that time, the collaboration between the police department and JeffCom is really critical. Jody and the chief would be talking on a very regular basis. We would be doing things like coming up to train officers on procedures and radios and all those other kinds of things that would be necessary for them to have in order to make that transition happen. That's when we would want to do things like ride-alongs. We would want to do those different activities to start to give people that knowledge in advance. So it may seem like a long time, but it's really to make sure that the service is at the level that it needs to be day one. And then just lastly, a couple of things. The we've mentioned it a number of times with the CAD to CAD piece and talking about what those transfers look like and how that's going to work. And then working through the reverse 911 piece and how that's going to work and how that's going to be managed. So again, neither of those issues are insurmountable or things that we haven't dealt with, but just wanted to raise those as open questions that would need to be worked out prior to the transition. Obviously, in the case where you have to put in a year notification, there's plenty of time to sort of stage this and make sure that it goes smoothly, but you know, did want to put those out there. So that was all we had in terms of formal presentation, but certainly happy to take any questions as you all want to ask as we're here. So.
Any questions?
I think one of the things too, so encryption, I think has come up. So what does that look like again? Is that dependent on the radio channel or just, I guess, can you speak to that?
So the agencies in Jefferson County primarily run, the law agencies primarily run encrypted. It's not a requirement, but it is, most of the channels that are there are encrypted. And so Idaho Springs has the choice. If you want to run encrypted, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So it would be an option in terms of that.
Okay.
That's
I know we talked about that.
Yeah. And it's you know, the encryption debate has obviously gone on at the state level and all over the place. And so, you know, that can go lots of different ways. I mean, many of the agencies that we see, their primary channels aren't necessarily encrypted, and then they will encrypt TAC channels, others encrypt everything. So it's a little bit philosophical in terms of how you want to manage that, but you do have the options.
Right.
You're not currently encrypted. To continue enhancing the capability for you to talk to the sheriff's department. They're not going to be encrypted. You don't want to be encrypted.
Exactly, because that's really critical.
There's not a reason it's not something we're driving or pushing. We still
Right.
got to continually have operation.
Right.
It's our things to have to work through on our end, but we're not driving that.
And I
And then
think
again, that becomes a state process now. You've got to make applications through the state to get encryption and notification to the community. Most of the agencies went to it back in 2019.
yeah, right before.
Like 19, there was a sunset on this, and they had to get in before that. All of the ones we currently serve are encrypted.
Anything more? I want to thank you. We went a little long, but frankly, this is really
We're happy
important.
to take as much time as you want.
Well, no, and I'd rather go a little long and hammer this out. We've invited the sheriff's department to come and chat with us in coming weeks. And my guess is we probably will have some follow-up questions for you.
Sure.
Absolutely. I did bring 3 of our 2021 annual reports as part of the agreement. We do monthly reports, quarterly reports, and annual reports. I'll leave these here. You can look at them all away, whatever you want to do. But shows the quality and the number and the volumes of calls that we do. It breaks down the agency all the way down to our very smallest. So I will leave these here, Mayor, for you and staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely. You should send me a copy of that. Yep, sure. Get a card. Hey, just give me your name.
You see, I got a card. I don't know, like.
No problem.
I can send it to you.
John,
Sheriff, I'll send it.
Oh, okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Oh, then I can connect you guys as well.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that'd
Yeah, I'm
be
happy.
great. I couldn't see exactly.
I get it.
I have my card with me. Right. I have it.
Real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you. Safe drive. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Sure. Pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll introduce you.
I don't know about that,
I'll contact you. Set up a meeting.
Yeah. Scout record. Scout record.
All right, next topic. We've got a staff report on the parking management and enforcement. Spread them.
Chiefs.
Yeah, I didn't see-
I'll go first.
Sure.
Okay. Mayor, council, staff has been looking at whether or not, analyzing whether or not what the impacts would be if the city of Idaho Springs were to tackle doing the enforcement piece. There have been, I think overall the service has been okay, but there definitely have been some hiccups and some challenges in working with Interstate and sort of the customer service. And I think that one of the things that we wanted to sort of explore and look at is what are those impacts and what that might look like. So you have a staff report that Jonathan and I kind of teamed up and worked on these both staff reports. And so I'll speak to what those impacts might be. So obviously there's costs if the city were to look at doing enforcement, but there's also potential gains depending on what that looks like, right? So right now the city's, and I'll let Jonathan speak to the actual more into the weeds as far as the money, but the city is obviously giving a portion of those fines to the interstate, right? So, and if the city is also sort of on the cusp of potentially having a parking structure, parking deck. And so this might be a sort of interesting time for the city to analyze whether or not this is something that we should tackle. So
And she was I just really briefly talked to her about how this looks. Most communities pay 10 to 50,000 for services like technology services, which would be the kiosks. We also have contactless payment and QR code payment, which haven't been really fully utilized. That doesn't work for everybody, but it helps because it's free. Going on, you get the kiosk. I think we'd be in that range. I've done like 30,000, depending on how the kiosks work.
But in a percentage base, we would, instead of.
That would probably be our annual cost, is somewhere in there, 30 to 50,000 is what I've kind of been thinking. Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, so we'd be keeping,
Hundreds of thousands more.
right, 90+%. As well.
And
Yeah,
Jonathan,
for sure.
if I'm not mistaken, you're just saying how much parking revenue going towards that garage. Once the garage is built, there is going to be an increase in sales tax.
Oh, yeah.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah.
It
Because-
could change this whole equation and what we've been
Yeah.
hearing about. So
Yeah.
So I don't know how you bet on the future, but the sales tax is gonna go up.
I'll give you an example of what I've been thinking. So in Idaho Springs, we have about 2,100 seats. And that's bar seats and restaurant seats. And then you got the restaurants. And what you see here, the traffic goes Bojo's and Tom Knockers and Westbound, the big places that people, really associate. And then they come and they go to the secondary visits. Not that they're less important, but just they come and they shop because they want ice cream, goat spice and tea shop, all the things they like to do downtown.
Well, they're east of everything.
Right,
That's-
yeah.
I mean, it's geographic, that's how it is.
Yeah, so you get like this tiered effect of what can happen, but we
Right.
know that right now we're seeing anywhere from 2.2 to 2.7 people per vehicle on I-70. So when you think about that in terms of vehicle transactions, that's 2 to 3 people per transaction downtown. And we have that 2,800 seats, and we know that Bojo's and Tommyknockers both are operating at, I think, less than 80% capacity at the moment, although I may be wrong. We
I
have
heard something like that too. Yeah.
pretty good idea that we can make downtown work more efficiently. The other thing is with the parking structure, if we do build it, it's going to help keep people out of residential areas. So we'll see less campers on Wall Street or whatever, so.
Yep. That's what I was gonna get to next, is that,
And I brought up to the mayor before that with the federal government trying to push electric vehicles, I don't know if there's any money out there that would allow us if we put in more electric spaces.
I had an initial conversation with Excel about that topic. And so I think we'll have another information about that, but CDOT wants electrified spaces.
And that's one of
That's what
the
I mean.
reasons they're willing to
If
kick
we're
in
willing to
6.3.
exactly, and didn't they approve the 9 with us too? The 7 or 9 spots back there?
Those ones, the charge point station is moving forward, right, Jared? Over by the fire?
They have been moving forward, they're drawing up plans.
In the back lot here, no?
It's
No, over
actually
here.
over by the worship.
But
By
we would
the
have
fire
more,
station.
we could potentially have more over here.
But I'm sure we're gonna have electric spaces and parking.
I think that's a requirement.
That's
It's
required.
Spaces.
But I mean, if the federal government comes along and says, we want to push this along,
Throw
throw
more
more money
to
at it,
go with that, yes, that's also true.
and we put 35 spaces instead of 20 spaces, I don't know. I just think it's going that way,
That will help with our average sailing too, because those people need to be here for an hour.
So they break down
Yeah.
till they break down.
25 grand.
But that's exactly right.
Tesla.
Just keep your record business going.
They're all diesel, but
But I mean, hauling the electric cars
Yep,
would be
that's
hauling
right.
those.
They're all
as well as
on
everybody
diesel.
else.
and I drive my GTO just for fun.
We have to do that.
That's right.
Citations here, you can see pretty consistently that we've had about 5% of transactions as citations. This number could be improved too, and that's why I did this next chart. There's 2 ways this could be. I want to show you what it looked like if that was revenue, which is about, on average 22,000. But again, that's a kind of a weird number just because we've had so much fluctuation.
Those are citations by,
That's if they were paying for an average ticket. So like if they were saying for the average sailing, but in the gross citation value, 600,000, I estimated for 2023, that's based on the $50 ticket price and the 5%. Now, this is another thing to talk about because we do need to think about how we're going to enforce. Like you said, we get a lot of tickets here with people who say they didn't see a parking sign and they send us a picture with the sign.
Can I just interject one thing, just so people don't get confused, there's a difference between a ticket and a citation.
Correct.
yeah, what is
Because
that?
we're using that interchange.
A violation, a notice of violation is what interstate issues. That's a $50, and basically the reason we made it $50 is because that's a little bit more than it costs to park all day unlimited. So what we're really saying is, hey, you didn't pay for parking, we don't know how long you were here, so you pay the max. Citation, the ticket value here, which I should have put that a little bit different. That's from the city, and that's for a hazardous or safety problem.
That number, that 600,000, what the city grows, or
Well,
total.
that's like if you did the citations issued by Interstate times 5% based on the transactions or estimating for 2023.
And that's if everybody actually pays.
Pay, right, okay, all right.
So I mean, that could be a variable number too, if we get better at.
Plus you gotta pay to enforce this.
Correct.
There's gonna be administration and trying to enforce tickets.
Right, and Interstate has some data about their gross or their net, how they net out their revenue based on fees and stuff like that. And we could look at that a little bit more too with them. The last section on here, I just did a little bit about a new proposed rate structure. I think this is something that's going to be critical for us. What I would like to do, this has two reasons. Number one, this simplifies the user experience on the kiosk because you only have to hit one button. Currently, you could buy a half hour, an hour, 2 hours, whatever, and it gets complicated. This structure, it's just $2.50 an hour, so it's $5. You get the 2 hours, you pay $5, you're done, and then $5 an hour after that. We could do 3 hours for $5, but I think when you look at the average sailings, I don't know that that's a huge benefit to us right now. But we could even do that like in the busting lot and the 103 lot until if and when the fire station is built there. If we did some outlying areas where it's a little bit cheaper, I think that's totally fine too.
I really think that simplifies things, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I see why you were looking at that. And I would recommend until the fire station is built, maybe we do have a cheap lot out there and it incentivizes people to walk.
Well, we can do a little bit of work if we bring this in-house too about signage and improve it. That's another thing that we haven't quite talked about. I'd love to make those signs better and more consistent with what you expect a paid parking sign to look like. In Chicago, they don't have yellow signs, they have blue signs.
Right.
And that's what we need too.
Well, I think
We need more signs.
We need
Yeah.
increased signage. I mean,
More of them.
Yeah.
it's just not
1,000.
good enough right now.
I agree.
Well, we might be able to play around, Golden, one thing they're doing for their residential parking, they've actually barricaded residential streets really close to downtown. Like
Yeah.
avenues and stuff, and
Yeah.
it seems like it's working. So there's some things people are doing that are,
Right,
possible.
I seen that on 19th or whatever, it comes off the new, through the new roundabouts and stuff down to the main drag where the high school stuff is.
What's Interstate's mechanism for, this, source to drive rental cars and storage for not paying the tickets? When we had the opportunity in-house to
Yeah,
put something together.
so those go
That's a
right
lot
to
of
the
money that,
rental car company currently, whatever it happens to be. And so then we could do the same. I think that's something we can replicate with the software.
most of them cooperate.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
That person that you were talking about that no longer works with Interstate, is she available to come and give us?
I think so. If we wanted to go down this route and we wanted to establish an RP, I'm sure she would come talk to council. She loves Idaho Springs. She was always very good here.
I'm good.
But you can see there at the bottom what the, estimated gross revenue looks like. You add a parking restriction on top of that, it's closer to 1.5.
Yeah.
So, and I was just telling, I've been saying, these numbers are built on data now. We know that they're not perfect, like things are gonna change and vary, but we know that these numbers are relatively accurate at this point.
Well, in that 1.5 million, it shows what an expensive date Interstate is.
Mhm.
Because essentially, we would be given $750,000
Yeah,
to them,
giving away.
right? Plus 60% of the ticket revenue.
And we're still taking on
Yeah, they're still coming
20%
screaming at
of
staff.
the calls, they're calling and screaming at city personnel.
There you go.
Right.
We're still dealing with it. Yeah, for nothing.
For our 50%.
It was a good program for us when we started, and they have tried. I'm not trying to say they're bad people or anything like that. It's just, I think that when we work in government, I think the first thing I ever learned in my first job, lifeguarding, my boss was like, you work on a fishbowl now, you can't do anything. That's crazy or anything. You gotta remember, people are watching all the time, and that's a good thing. And that's what we are
Double
here.
gamers.
Yeah, we gotta make sure that we're
Off the
above
lifeguard
reproach. Yeah, exactly, even though I did it anyway.
No closing down the moves at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Right.
Stumbling home.
None of that.
Huh?
then, you know, we get the jobs in our community that are good, you know, quality jobs that have a pathway forward. I think, you know, one thing I think could be interesting is look at, I think Boulder has what they call the Department of Community Vitality. And they manage parking and residential concerns and things like that. And some of these things that we see, we have problems with in the city, like when, you know, this interaction between tourism and residential quality of life and all these things that are so important for us to manage. It's a lot of the work that I have been doing since I've been here. I think there's a lot of natural intersection between what we're talking about with parking management and doing some of these things for our community in a way that's logical and not, you know, just running around like a chicken with their head cut off. So
Sure.
I think, you know, maybe that's a later goal, but for now, we manage parking in-house and we improve our customer experience, I think make your life better for sure.
Yeah, I just want to ask, there's 4 members of council here now. Are there any additional questions for Chief or Jonathan?
No, I think it's very productive session so far.
Yeah, I agree, Art. So towards the back of Jonathan's presentation, there's a staff recommendation for option 2. And I just want to take the temperature and see if folks would entertain going along with option 2 or not. And option 2, of course, is the city currently is in a respectable parking management position with Interstate. And the city would request proposals for reorganizing parking enforcement under the city and allow the city to see various options from various different vendors. Certainly Interstate would have the opportunity to respond with the RFP along with the other vendors. The city may ultimately decide not to select any of the proposals and maintain its current contract with Interstate, dependent upon the proposals and that are submitted. The city may also discover untapped opportunities offered from other vendors if the city were to reorganize and provide parking enforcement services from within. So that is staff recommendation, and I want to know is council leaning in that direction or not?
I think option 1 stated leave it alone. And I'm not for option 1. So I'm for option 2 or some version of option 2 that we pursue that creates a better working situation for everyone.
When we go out to look for other vendors, do you send something directly to vendors, or it's just a publication that you hope people will respond to?
We try to do both. We have a Rocky Mountain bid network that we can do postings so everyone can see it. But if we know of certain vendors that others have had good experience with, we'll send it directly to them to try to get them to.
So some of all the parking companies on the interstate, the headquarters are not in Colorado. We got the standard parking out of Chicago, and town parking out of Maryland.
Owned by the Monkey.
And then, yeah, then we've got the,
Ought to be.
we got Bruno's
He's ignoring.
parking. But
We
that's
got-
another story. These are the guys.
Like trash companies.
But I'm with Scott. I think it's entirely too generous of a situation, particularly when some of that burden is still on staff shoulders.
I apologize because everybody worked so hard on that, but I thought that thing was going to be good. I really did. Jonathan worked so hard on it, I felt that maybe my information from my experience was outdated and that things had changed, so, you know,
We're just a little slow.
Well, and
Your way of thinking.
I don't think it was outdated, but it was a freebie. It didn't cost us anything, and that's how they extended it.
I know.
But I think your intuition was spot on.
I just didn't like the way the guy sat when he talked to you. Well, I wasn't in council, I was sitting over there. I just didn't like his posture. There was something not right there. He may be the best guy in the world. I read him. So,
Jimmy, what do you think?
I think Art's pretty judgmental.
I am.
But that's
My wife
okay.
tells me that all the time.
That's all right. I love it.
Sometimes intuition is key.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with council. Scott brought up a good point. He really did.
So
Well, I'm glad we have a consensus on that,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
I just want to ask Chief a question. We didn't talk about if we do decide to take it in-house, there are several changes that would need to happen to like our parking code, our parking plan, all that kind of stuff. There's no, if you wanted to say, or if we want to talk about that a little bit, or just leave that for a more detailed conversation here.
yeah, I think that's pretty probably far on the weeds. I think there's just some things we would have to evaluate our current code. We spoke to the municipal court judge to see if, if someone really wants to contest this, what that might look like. And so we've gotten some people on board, but there's probably there will be some steps that we'll have to kind of go through to make sure that we're doing this correctly. So there's a lot of work ahead in doing this.
If we were to take it on as option 2 states, I think there's a lot of thought process and planning that would have to take place. And even at that point, it's not gonna be a cakewalk. It's gonna have its ups and downs and speed bumps.
Well, it's just like other people. I mean, hiring people,
It's management.
right? I mean, getting people hired and managing it, and then depending on how the RFP is written, there's certainly, Andy has access to some of those things too. I would recommend the city do as much. I say the downstream part, I think I may have told the mayor, the easy part is issuing the citation. It's everything after that becomes it can become complex when they don't pay, or if they want to fight the ticket, or now, I mean, there's all these other things that have to happen. So there's definitely ways, I think, to offer the proposals or the RFP in a way that maybe some of that is handled by the vendor to kind of not burden and overburden city staff. So just things to think about.
And, I would also suggest if we took it in-house and we were absolutely horrible at collecting any parking tickets. We're looking at the difference between $750,000 and $1.5 million. So I'm saying if we didn't collect like any of the parking revenue, even paying staff would be miles ahead. And I'm sure we probably wouldn't generate as many tickets, but we would collect some, and would we be ignored as much as interstate? Yeah, maybe, but I think there's just a huge amount of money that the difference here, given interstate 50% of the parking revenue plus 60% of the ticket revenue is just, they get a real sweetheart deal.
Thank you, guys. And I do appreciate your knowledge of parking too. I'll always stand chastised when there's a better way, so.
Thank you, John. You work hard, dude. All
You
you
work
guys.
very hard. I really respect what you do, John.
Wander, and all you guys.
I hate to go backwards a little bit there, but could you clarify what our next steps with the item 1 tonight, where that's going, and what our next steps are gonna be for?
Well, I think it'd be responsible to get a request for proposal out there. We may find that.
I'm going back all the way back to
Dispatch conversation.
dispatch.
Oh,
If I may, before we do that, may I just
Sure.
get clarity on this? So I hear direction to move forward with option 2.
Yes.
And I think this is very timely because I think our next step as staff is to put together, to crank this into the budget proposal for 2023. And talking with staff, I don't think we could possibly implement this any earlier than maybe May, maybe try to get this set up before the summer. That might be aggressive too. We'll keep council up to date. But I think we'll put together this, we have our parking enterprise fund now, and we think this is where these costs, these revenues and expenses would be reflected. So we'll put together a proposal there for council's consideration in the upcoming weeks and start moving that direction. So I just want to let you know that's what I see our next step. And then of course council has more review of that and approval of that. And if we really want to pull the trigger, we still want to pull the trigger then we can do that as part of the budget process, and that'll be our direction to make
Right.
this happen in 2023. The other thing I would just get clarity on is the rate, the parking fee increase that John's recommendation. Do I hear a consensus to go ahead and move forward with that and bring that back to council for
You're all
approval?
right?
Yeah, I
What do you think, Art?
No, I agree. I do have a question.
So what I see happening there is John will bring back that as an action item, and I would suggest we just start January 1st.
Yes.
So we have plenty of time to get the word out, explain it, simplify the process. It also helps stabilize and our revenue and makes the revenue projections a little bit easier as
Right.
well. So we think that makes a lot of sense. John, has done a lot of research. He proposed this once before, and we went with the $2, and I think that was a good way to ease into this, but I think now we're seeing the benefit of this. So
Scott, you okay with that?
Yeah, with this.
Yeah, okay, yeah, so that makes it unanimous.
So you were stating something about the free parking. Is that part of this, is trying to provide the free parking across the highway?
Well,
It'd be
it's a reduced rate.
reduced rate
Reduce.
to encourage.
Incentivize folks to walk across.
Yep, if they want to pay less,
Right.
they can park across the highway.
And is there,
But then,
is there lines over there, or is that?
Yeah.
There is
Yeah.
stretch.
Yeah, what do we have, 54 spots, something like that?
Yeah. It could use, it doesn't always get parked the best, but it does work pretty good.
Yeah, and I have seen days when there were 50 to 54 spots
Yeah.
taken.
Oh, yeah. I've seen Gene.
More as an economy lot for parking. The only thing that troubles me about our parking enterprise fund is it's designated for parking in downtown improvements. I don't agree with that. I think all the parking revenue should stay into anything that's only related to parking and to saving money towards our parking lot and stuff like that. I just think it should be separated unless I'm missing something as far as what kind of improvements you think the parking fund should do. Now that we have a separate one.
Well, improvements should be like asphalt or stripes, right?
Street improvements.
Right, is that correct?
Well, I mean, we do, I mean, I can't even imagine what it would cost to repave this out here, but
Oh,
that
Lord.
would be one.
Astronomical.
Yeah.
Jared's got seen the.
Oh, yeah, Jerry?
Yeah, one of the reasons why we had included other improvements was we had worked through the downtown master planning process. And that had identified some different locations within downtown that we could potentially improve in the future. Of course, our first priority is still the mobility hub at this point in time because of the timeliness factor with CDOT, et cetera. But if everything goes well, we get the mobility hub built, we're paying down the any bonds that were associated with it. If there's any revenue left over, we could still work towards other downtown improvements with the hopefully long-term end goal of being able to redo the streets in downtown. We do have quite a few restaurants that would prefer to have outdoor cafes close to the buildings rather than in the streets. Maybe doing a curbless design, all of those types of things. That's what was.
So how were we paying for those before we had to pay parking?
Well, the downtown master plan just came out about a year ago.
I know, but before that, how did we pay for the improvements in the streets that you?
We used to have what was called a business improvement district, and it's very similar to what the CID is. It's a slightly different government structure, but they create an assessment to pay for the sidewalks and lights and all that kind of stuff, the bump outs downtown.
Yeah, that's how we got the pavers and all
Yeah.
that.
But like, and John Bordoni would speak this better than me, but like the stub outs for the utilities and the sidewalks and the curbs are getting to be in rough shape. And so, to Jared's point, we're thinking, the way I was thinking about when we did it is that the downtown district is heavily impacted by tourism. And this gives us a revenue source that comes from tourism to help pay for some of those impacts.
How is
And the
that
salaries
money?
and everything have come out of this parking.
Right, yeah, and O&M for the structure, and it would come out of there as well once we get there.
who's in charge of how that money's spent? How are those decisions made? If something like that, if somebody wants to, is that coming from council?
Yeah, it would. It's a tabor fund, so that's the,
It has to.
it has to come through all those rules. It's an enterprise fund essentially, so you would make that decision.
Anything more on the parking? Scott, just to digress, and I'm sorry, now that I
To
fully
clarify
understand
that,
you.
yeah, I need to clarify.
Oh, yeah,
I'm not sure that we're entering a discussion over that topic tonight. My thought is just what's the next step in the process?
so in fairness, we have asked for the sheriff's department to come. Frankly, they may have a different take on why we should stay within the Clear Creek dispatch. And we would want to hear them out and weigh the pros and cons, you know, from both what was presented tonight and from the sheriff's department. And that's why I was saying to the JeffCon people, we probably would have some follow-up questions. And that would be based on what the sheriff would present to us.
But they think a percent of their budget, say that's what we're gonna charge us for the
Yeah.
calls.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, it was like 29.75% of Clear Creek County. So that's why,
$1.2 million budget.
yeah, so
in
we're
another year.
right, we're at 303,000 and change in 2024.
Yeah, 2 years.
So what happens to the Clear Creek County budget when we get the woman?
Art?
It-
Art, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, but I'm saying that I wouldn't be really surprised if at least the county manager didn't look at maybe the whole county going to JeffCon.
That was my
would be
question. Can't
smart.
they, because there's a technology issue here.
I mean, yeah,
There's
economies of
something-
scale.
There's something wrong with them
them.
spending that kind of money in our county
Yeah,
for that type of service
Yeah.
when somebody else can provide it for a hell of a lot less.
I'm saying if JeffCom is willing to provide it for less than a third, then wouldn't the county be in a position to save $750,000 or $1 million?
well, the way I think they think, I'm not too sure.
Well, that was my thoughts, is why can't the county go with this?
Right,
That's what they should, because we had a county board member.
yes, yeah, George Marlin was here. So, yeah, I think,
When technology takes over.
Sure. There you
I saw a very similar process in my past location where the city itself had a dispatch center and we dispatched for about 5 different entities. One of our largest entities ended up leaving. And so the dispatch center was closed. The city had to go to a county-based operation. Luckily, the nice part about it was that there were 2 different counties that we spanned, and between the 2 different counties, they picked up all of our dispatchers.
Wow. All right,
Now, the distances are a little different if you're mountain, but that was good.
I thought I heard the sheriff say that he would like to come in and meet with council. Did I hear that this evening?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I had invited him. He was sort of.
I knew the invitation had been extended.
Presentation, and he just asked me before he left to contact him about the date to come back.
oh, good,
So we'll get that scheduled.
okay. All right, that sounds like a good plan.
The good news is this is not a budgetary impact for 2023 for the city. I mean, we just continue as we are, but as Chief pointed out, under the current IGA, if we want to leave open the option of leaving, we need to send a letter before the end of this year.
Yep.
Saying it is our intent to leave. We can still change our mind, but we need to open up that
So our
possibility.
contract would follow with them for the whole year 2023.
Correct. So the earliest we would
be out.
if council's direction is to go to JeffCon, the earliest we would see that cutover would be January of 24. January 24. And we would really need to have, we really do need to have the direction here soon because we would need to let JeffCon know, and so they can start preparing. And then, as you heard them say, ideally they'd want about 6 months to starting in
Right.
July to be ready to go live January 1st of 24.
Sure.
You like it, Chief? You like the idea?
There's pros and cons. There's pros and cons. And so what I would envision too, after the sheriff department comes here and whether or not I'll hear back from Kevin Armstrong, the sheriff in Gilpin. So we'll see. I would recommend council that they present and then potentially, I don't know if that discussion takes place after the sheriff presents or if there's just another.
I think we have a
Work
follow-up work session and
So
then,
then, because you really
That's
want
what
to
I'm
have all
doing.
the information, right? And I just think it's, so, there's pros and cons. We have, they do a great job here. In fact, it's better than where I came from. So, I mean, they do a really good job here with dispatchers. So I didn't get a chance to say that really, before, but I've got like no issues with them as far as their customer service or anything like that. I think they do fantastic. The concern is just the long game and that it's 3 times as cost is 3 times as much. And as the Jeffcom people said, they bring a lot to the table. When there's a big emergencies, they have 30 dispatchers all there.
Yeah.
And they can draw people like just snapping a finger to say you 4 people need to go help deal with this or whatnot. So there's just, I don't know, there's again, pros and cons to that. So I'm going to listen. They brought me a radio, so I'm going to listen to those channels that we would potentially be on just to kind of get a sense of what that is like.
They run on 800 megahertz as well, or no?
I'm not sure. I think so.
All right, if everybody's ready, we'll bring up John Bardoni.
John Bardoni has been
Been very patient.
Very
Yes.
patient.
John, come on up. Join the chief over here.
John, you should show up at 7:45.
God at least let you weigh in on some of this if you're gonna sit there.
Yeah, for real.
I'll just listen. So mayor and council, what kind of prompted this is, that we do need to do some repairs and replacement of the water line. Unfortunately, as some members of council have gotten a response from the fire authority. I don't know if we should be going to build the fire department there or not. I haven't got a time or a date or a positive response yet, but the thought was that if they do, whether they do or not, we need to replace that one. So we can break this, it's an expensive project, obviously. $3 to $6 million projects. If we just split it into projects a mile at a time, starting in the parking lot, and just head west a mile and do that, and then another mile and another mile. The water treatment plant's about 3.5 miles, so approximately a mile each mile.
And John, this was on our capital improvement plan for 5 years, right?
Yes,
Because
yes.
we've had, 3 repairs on it, right? And it's, well, I understand some of it is like, it looks dry on the surface, but it's wet on the bottom once you get down there. There's pitting. And
So is it scope? Is that, can we determine?
No, it hasn't been scoped inside. The areas that we had to dig up and repair are, this sits right next to the river in a lot of places, and it sits in the water too. So you not only have water inside, but you have water surrounding the outside too. And it also goes by the Black Eagle mine and several other mines that go up Chicago. And that's the same thing with Virginia Canyon.
And we don't really have a third-party assessment of its deterioration or
No.
it's firsthand knowledge from John
Firsthand.
Bardoni, right?
just for
And
the 3
the city
repairs. And
utility crew that this thing's in dire need of, and what's the age of it?
It was put in, I believe, in the early 80s. It was placed, so that's almost 40 years old already.
Now, we have seen with some of these breaks we've had in the last few years, the condition of the pipe. And that's been.
That's what I mean, yeah,
That's been
pictures of that and everything.
Right.
So what we risk is not repairing it and having some catastrophe or a big
That is
issue.
correct, and if that happens, then we will need 911 dispatch because the city will not have water. The only water that we will have is what's in the storage tank at Soda Creek and Montane, and that's not a lot to support a city for a long period of time.
What about that air thing, aired up, sing down the pipe and it's all brand
To
new?
pig the line.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen it on TikTok, so I'm sure.
Typically, they can do that. They can clean the line that way, but that doesn't repair.
Right, the external part of it.
Right.
Yes.
So the location of the line, it seems like that is also a problem, right?
It is a problem if the fire department does build there, because the map isn't completely 100% accurate, but it almost, the water line almost cuts the lot in half.
And that's the only issue with the location though, because it seems like maybe
Well,
there's
they have
other
a few
locations.
issues. They are in a floodplain, so they're gonna have.
No, I
to
mean the
build
water
their
line
water line.
completely, in other, that's the only place that the location is bad, or is there other current locations that are at issue? Are we
No,
changing it?
actually, we haven't had any issues in this parking lot. We did have a service line break in that parking lot. The issue with the line is about a half a mile up.
And that's
Upstream.
location, or is the location gonna be the same place for the new line, or is any?
Probably because, as you know, Chicago Creek, there's not a lot of right of way or real estate on either side of the road.
Okay,
So there's either private property or you have Chicago Creek, the creek itself on it. So the biggest issue with the parking lot right now is if the fire department does go there, then the line will have to be moved, and that line is pretty deep. So it's gonna have to be, their building's gonna have to be set back far enough that we still have a wide enough easement that we have to do 10 foot deep, but we have room to do that. And the Chicago Creek sanitation is actually on the edge of the parking lot also. It's not the edge of the road. The edge of the road is a gas line. And then it has the sewer line, and then it has the water line in the parking lot. But I thought that this would be a place to start with replacement of that line.
so how are we getting our cost estimates so far? It's not
Well, that's part of my question tonight.
projected, right?
It's not projected. So my consideration for the council is, do you want me to contact our city, not attorney, but engineer about getting an estimate of cost of moving this line and replacing the line for the first mile? It's gonna be a task. It's gonna have geotechnical survey, CDOT right away, CDOT permits. Yeah, it's quite a bit.
That's the only way you do it, right?
That's
If you
right.
move forward as a project, you have to get that
We'll have to
first.
do engineering.
And they won't give us any of that, CDOT or otherwise.
No, see,
No. You didn't say
wasn't my road.
that.
So these are very expensive projects. The little piece of good news is we're hearing through we've attended a seminar recently on the Colorado Water Resources Power Development Authority about the additional funds that they have available for water and sewer projects. And they have quite a bit more grant funding that's available, and also low interest loans. So, and as we all know, the best way for us to position ourselves to go after that funding and have a strong application is to have the design and engineering done.
Yeah.
So we really think, even before we get into the new year, we'd like to get going on this design and engineering, at least for this first segment. We know that there might be this issue with the line being in the way of the fire station, and we want to work with the fire authority in that regard. But even more importantly, we want to be in a position to go after some of this funding, because these are very expensive
We've been on
projects.
borrowed time with this.
Yeah.
Sure. You know.
Yeah.
Is council okay with moving forward?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right. That's brave, man. We'll throw
Oh, yeah.
a picture of it.
You guys know how to get grants, like everybody else does.
John does.
Yeah.
I just got into this
It's like
really
a
cool
wizard.
boot camp program for National League of Cities, which is a big federal organization. And it's a lot about this federal infrastructure money that's coming down, and some of it is for this too. So And Mayor and Andy both have to go to meetings too, but it's gonna be a lot of training. But it'll be good because
So we
we
know
know
about
access
it.
to one. So.
Even the mayor's gotta go. There's a mayor,
Man.
just geared for mayor's segment of that whole thing. So John will get a proposal from JDA and bring that back here for council's approval, and we'll get started on that. Is that okay?
So I've talked to JB, I haven't really given the full scope of the project. What we want.
John, you got so many projects, you're never gonna be able to leave.
You know, unfortunately, for a small city, we have a lot of expenses.
That means you can't leave. Once these
Too many
projects
projects.
start and you're
Too
in
many
charge of them,
projects.
you can't go anywhere.
No,
You're in charge of them.
that's right. You're stuck.
That's to be seen.
Funny, he's got less hair every week.
I
He's
know.
here, man.
That's true.
Every week, every Monday, you can see it.
Well, anything more before we adjourn? All right, we're gonna call it good at 8:07.